Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. I am so excited to introduce our guest today, Allissa Dillman, founder and CEO slash everything at Biodata Sage LLC. Allissa, I would love it if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do and something you like to do for fun.
Sure. So hello everybody. Not gonna lie, I was like slightly nervous about doing this, mostly because it's recorded forever and that means I have to remember what I say. But yeah, so my original background is I have a PhD in computational neuroscience. And I have actually been working in training and community engagement for a long time. I actually worked at NIH in the Office of Data Science Strategy up until a little shy of 4 years ago, when my job sort of became more and more about talking about doing the thing instead of doing the thing, or writing about the thing instead of doing the thing, and decided that that was not quite where I was at in my career path. So I looked around for other jobs in kind of like what I was hoping to do, which is around like community and training, but also like using my technical expertise in computing and coding. And I really didn't find anything that kind of combined all those things. So I decided, okay, then I'll just make up my job. And I quit NIH and I started my own company back in like, I want to say like April of 2022. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And I just want to say that I'm no longer all on my own doing all the things. I actually just hired my first full-time employee this year. So I feel like I can more officially be like, I am an entrepreneur now because I have employees and it's a real business.
Amazing. So excited for you. And also, Alyssa gave one of my favorite talks at PositConf in 2025. So, like, speaking of PositConf talks, Alyssa can speak to that a little bit. I'm going to stick the link to her talk in the chat. It's called From Solo to Social, Making Coding a Collaborative Adventure. And as a person who also loves to teach people coding in social environments, it made my heart sing. I loved everything about it. Go bookmark it and watch it afterwards. But Alyssa, I would love it if you could first tell us a little something you like to do for fun, and then I'll
Oh,
ask you about a little recap of your talk.
yes. So the two things eating up most of my time right now is I'm in a band. I'm the singer, and we have another gig coming up in a bar in DC. So definitely spending a lot of time doing that. And the other big thing is I am attempting to finish Hollow Knight. I actually put it down for a while and had life things. I have a 7-year-old, and recently kind of sat back down and was like, I don't remember where I was. And because Hollow Knight is one of those games where basically like you kind of revisit places as you
Yeah.
build. Like I was like, I don't remember where I went before, but like that's been eating up a lot of my time.
Anybody else walk away from Hollow Knight after investing a lot of time into it? Because goodness, Nor says Hollow Knight makes me feel old. Same. I'm like, wow, I swear I'm not bad at platformers, but this is hard. Okay. I would love it if we could do a quick recap, if it's possible, an elevator pitch for what you talked about at PositConf and why that was on your heart and important to talk about.
Yeah. Um, so I am somebody who originally learned coding sort of on my own. It was not necessarily like the original plan. And a lot of how I sort of ended up learning was I would sort of read some things or look up some code, but at the end of the day, I just like accost other humans until I could like actually like talk with them and work through something because it didn't stick for me unless I could kind of like work through the problem with somebody else, even if it was verbalizing, even if it was just like whiteboard coding. Like I'm a very extremely extroverted person. But there was also something about like that wasn't just about I felt like I learned more, but it also felt more like I belonged. Like I am somebody who is often in environments that I feel like maybe I don't belong. Like I come from somewhere really, really rural. I'm the first person in my family to get a college degree, let alone a PhD. So at NIH, I often was like, oh man, like they're going to find out I don't belong here. So I like often had this feeling of like imposter syndrome. And what's really great about like finding people to like work with or chat through, like, and even when they're like, nah, you did this completely wrong. Like, here's how you need to do it. Like I still felt like, okay, I belong here though, because I'm gonna like learn this thing and I'm doing this thing with somebody. And it just like it made me feel a lot more confident, even when people were just telling me off for doing something wrong. Like I really enjoyed that. And like I will say, like the other thing that really has just been really a lot of fun is seeing other people have the same kind of aha moment. Like when I ran my first women's codathon, hackathon, it was just really cool to hear how many women echoed kind of the sentiments that I echoed of like, I wasn't sure I fit, I wasn't sure I belonged. And now that I'm working with all these other great people, I'm more confident in what I'm doing. So like for me, like it was really about saying that I feel like we learn and grow and become more confident when we do things with others, not kind of just by ourselves. But that's obviously my take on it.
Well, it's my take too. And watching your talk, I kept sitting there going, yes, 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 this is it. This is the power of community. I don't think that you can exist in a community without learning from other people. It's just going to happen. They're going to mention something and you're going to be like, what? That function does that? And you're going to be like, yeah, it does. And you're going to talk about it. And then someone's going to learn from you. It is an inevitability. And it's one of the things that just makes my heart glow. Okay. I would love to hop over to the Slido to get to this fantastic anonymous question. When is your band performing in DC?
I
Somebody
know
wants to go
it's
see you.
I know it's in March, but I don't remember when.
It's sometime in March. Everybody,
Sometime
you
in
just you're just
March.
gonna have to look out for it.
Yes.
All right. Well, Noor had a fantastic question as well. Noor, would you like to unmute and ask your question? I will highlight it in Slido, and I will stick it in the chat as well.
You got me at the right time because I was about to just start another row
There
of
she is.
knitting. So like
Uh-oh. Okay.
you saved utter disaster. Hi, my name is Noor. I also live in the DMV area. I actually come from a computational biology background. And I've been debating this a lot, but what would you say are the largest challenges of setting out on your own as an entrepreneur? What are some things you would have done differently starting out and so forth? Basically, being an entrepreneur is scary, and evidently you're doing it successfully. So please tell me everything you know.
I have to admit, I sort of got to hit the ground running, I think, a little more than most people, potentially at least, because a lot of what I did at NIH was around community building and, training. And so like I already had like a ton of connections in universities, in nonprofits, in other government agencies. So that really kind of like, I had this huge network. So when I sort of decided, all right, I'm going to go solo, like a lot of people had already interacted with me, had worked with me, had knew what I was bringing to the table. And the other thing I will say is I do kind of, I like to think I bring something slightly unique to the table. As somebody who originally started out as a bench biologist, like somebody who does RNA biology, and then sort of doing the software and the coding and the cloud computing things, like all aimed towards like biological goals and questions. I think that has been a kind of a boon for me as well. So I do think those things really helped me. The other thing was, even though in my mind when I set out to do this, I was sort of like, oh, I'm just going to be like a freelance and just kind of go solo. Even back then, I sort of set up all of the pieces I would need for a company if I wanted to grow. Like I did all of the things like very formally, like I started my LLC like immediately, even before I got any clients. I like set up a business bank account. I did like all of those bits and bobs, sort of like right at the get-go. And I have to say it's really saved my butt a couple of times because when I've needed to like move quickly, like everything's already been there. And I've been like, okay, I can just turn this on. Like, for instance, an opportunity came around with some colleagues of mine for an NSF grant. And I happened to already be in SAM in this federal system. So like I could very quickly apply and things like that. So it's made sort of like all of a sudden when you need to turn something on, like all the pieces are there. So that's been super helpful. But I will say like feeding your network, growing your network, as much as you can, as often as you can. Because at the end of the day, like people didn't, fall onto my website. I mean, they are starting to now, but like that's certainly not how I got most of my clients in the beginning. But also then, like I said, finding something that is really unique to your skill set and what you bring to the table, whatever that might be.
Yes, absolutely. And what Allissa just mentioned, SAM, is the system for award management. Sam.gov is where you can go. And as someone who quit her corporate job to freelance in the same year that Allissa did, I will tell you, I did it completely differently. I was still okay. There are so many different ways to freelance and to be a kind of flexible worker. I will put it out there and say, my husband had insurance and I was able to get insurance through him. When you're in the United States, that's always the biggest question is like, well, what do you do? How do you have insurance? And there was a question in the Slido from Andreas that I think that you touched on a little bit. But I wanted to sort of let him ask his in case there's something that he wants to expand upon. Andreas, are you available to ask your question live? Andreas Handel? There he is. He's nodding.
Okay, now I think I'm on mute too.
You are.
Yeah, I think you mostly answered the question just now, but you said in your introduction that you quit your job and then you start your company. And it seems like that's a very scary transition, right? Quite often the advice is to start your company on the side, and then when it looks like it's going to work, then you can switch over. So I was just wondering how you made that work. And it seemed like you sort of answered it. You said you had already built a really good network that you could tap in right away. But still curious, a decently paid NIH job, replace that salary, quickly is not easy, right? So I'm just wondering how you made that transition smoothly.
Yeah, I will say so. Just on one point, like Libby, I was very fortunate. So my husband is a federal employee, and so I got health insurance through him. So that definitely helped because we have kiddos as well. So like that was definitely one part of the risk that at least was removed for that jump. The other part of this was, we had been kind of savvy in our original housing purchase, and it was actually enough for just like my husband's salary. So if things went really badly, we'd be okay for a little while. So like that made it a little bit easier as well. But I will say, like, I'd been thinking about doing this for probably about a year before I quit my job. When I moved from one institute at NIH to another one.
Uh-oh. I'm gonna mute Noor. Sorry.
That like in the middle of that transition, I did briefly kind of consider going solo, and then decided it wasn't quite the right time. So to be fair, even though like I sort of quit my job and then started my company, I had been kind of thinking about it for a while, and sort of like, asking other folks who'd started companies, like how they did that, how they navigated it, started looking at things like funding opportunities and, potential organizations that would make sense to partner with. Most of the federal grants that I have that I'm a part of, like I co-partner with somebody. So like, kind of thinking about finding those partners and things like that. So I had kind of like put a lot of little pieces together. And rather than kind of like trying to do like, first of all, I wouldn't actually be able to do that on the side, like because I was a federal government worker. So like there really was no option. Like I couldn't really do this on the side. That's generally like not allowable. So like that's one reason why I didn't kind of try to do this on the side, because I actually couldn't. But even if like I had that opportunity, I think for me part of it was like when I do something, I tend to go like 120%. Like I don't know that I would have been very good at like balancing this. And I know this because when I was working at NIH, I was actually supposed to be shared between two different places, two different departments. And I was supposed to be like 50% here, 50% here. And what realistically happened is I was like 100% in both places.
Two people, yeah.
Yes. So that was the other reason why I was like, you know what, I need to really put this thing down and pick this other thing up. But I know some people can definitely do that.
Yeah, I think it depends. And even if, I mean, even if you have the ability contractually to do it, working a second job outside of your job is exhausting. You do have to be two people because it's not just working the hours that you're billing for somebody on the side, it's doing all of the business things. You have to wear like this whole business hat and do a bunch of unpaid stuff. Okay, great question, Andreas. Thank you for asking. Alex, I saw that you had a question. I would love it if you could ask it live if you're available.
Yeah, hi. Long
Hey,
time lurker, first
yeah,
time question
hi.
asker. So my ears perked up when I heard NIH. I was like, oh, I work in state government as a data scientist at DPH in Connecticut. It's a scary time to be in public health, and I'm since the pandemic, I've just constantly been trying to get the agency to modernize and adopt R, Python, heck, just Git, like anything within the last like 2 decades, to get us move away from SaaS and just manual everything. And I wanted to hear about, maybe some of your wins at NIH and maybe, what your biggest ones were and how did you achieve those? I just hit wall after wall after wall. It's so hard.
Yeah, that's fair. I will say, I think that NIH is definitely in a little bit of a unique place because, NIH also has like researchers like that are doing research that are internal to NIH. So we do have a lot more kind of push to be like where we need to be to have our systems where they need to be, right? Because they are government employees, but they are trying to do scientific research. And so like it was not easy, but I had a lot of voices behind me when I'd be like, hey, we really should have enterprise GitHub, or we really should have, Posit Connect, or we really need to have this, that, or the other. It helped that I also was in like the office, like, so I was in the office for data science strategy. And the second office I was in was like, Center for Information Technology. So like I was kind of like at the hub of where these decisions are made. And as somebody who was also a trainer, I would constantly be like, look, if we want to have people have these skill sets, then they need the tools too. Like I can't teach them these skills unless we have the tools to do this work. And the other thing I think really helped was, so a big push in the office was all around FAIR. So findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and, the reproducibility crisis, and sort of being like, if we want to tackle these things, it's not just about, it's very much about changing mindset and behavior, but we also need the tools to help us get there. So that I feel like NIH is a little unique than other government agencies because we genuinely do have like quite a large research voice that can kind of push for needing these things.
I love it. Yeah, like there's so many people in the chat who are like, same, like same in my organization. This is hard. It's a hard thing. Thank you, Alex, for asking that question.
I will also say, like, some of the things that I put into motion, I'm like, even after I left, I'm like just now seeing them like 4 years later. I'll be like, oh, I helped start that project. I'm so happy that it finally got to the finish line. So Alex, I don't mean to say like everything was like, yes, immediate, huzzah. Like there are definitely things that I started, 5-6 years ago. And like, I'm just now seeing like those things being integrated.
Yes. And that feeds into a question that Natasha had asked. So I'd love to throw this in here as a quick follow-up, which is, could you expand a little bit on your actual work at NIH? Curious what types of projects you worked on and who you interacted with. So as much as you can answer.
Yeah, so I actually started at NCBI, which is part of the National Library of Medicine. So anybody who's sort of like in the bio field may know a little bit about NCBI because it is specifically where like we house basically all of like the publication, but also like data repositories for a bunch of the stuff that NIH makes. So like it really is kind of like like the place for like research information. And that's kind of where I started. And my job there was training and engagement. So a lot of it was around like helping people to use all of those resources. So building up those technical skill sets, but also tons of hackathons, right? Because we had all this data and we really wanted to learn more about like how people can reuse it. What kinds of ways do they want to reuse it? What kind of tools do we need for that reuse? What about our tools? When do they fit? When do they not fit? And honestly, hackathons can be one of the most fun ways to like learn a lot of that, like in rapid fashion. Like, oh, they didn't use our tool. They used this other tool that's kind of like our tool, but like they used it in this way. Or, oh, they wanted to use the data, but they couldn't find this metadata. Or, they wanted to, find this, but they actually didn't even know how it is findable and things like that. So like, I think a lot of people think of hackathons as just like you build some software, yay. But hackathons can be really great for like user information too, right? Like how are people actually using my stuff? So got to do a lot of that, and it was a ton of fun, but it was like very much I had to stay scoped to things that were within like that institute. So I wanted to kind of widen that net, and that's when I kind of found out about this new Office of Data Science, but they were so new that they were like, we're not really sure we have like full-time work for you. So I was kind of like shopping around for like other places that might also need some support. And I had kind of recently participated in some of the trainings from Strides. So this was like the whole cloud program at NIH, and was like, well, it'd be great if we could put some more biological spin on these tutorials for using cloud computing. So like I can help with that too. So I ended up being kind of half in like this cloud program and then the data science program. But as I mentioned, after a year of that, I was like, this is too much. I can't do this. And decided that the data science office was like the best fit. And then ended up applying for like a federal position there and was there for about 9 months. But like I said, my job sort of kept morphing into more of this like, let's sit in meetings and let's write reports and let's like think about thinking and talk about talking. And I very much like need to be doing things. So
I think other people can relate. I saw some like nods at that point. It's so hard. It's so hard to be like, okay, all these meetings are great. When do I do my actual work? And I really want to do the work and the meetings are great, but like, oh, it's hard. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that fantastic question, Natasha. I wanted to ask an anonymous question that came in and really open this up to everybody as well as Allissa. And the question was, any advice for introverts on networking? Allissa, do you think you're an introvert?
So I am what you would call an extreme extrovert. Yeah. I require novel human interaction on the regular. So I know that I often give the advice, I talk to students a lot because I have a very odd career path, and I very much bang on about like network. And I am very well aware that like, that's obviously a lot harder if you're an introvert versus an extrovert. So one thing I like to say, which I sound like I'm joking, but like I'm kind of not, is find your friendly neighborhood extrovert. Like we are always happy to hang out with you at a conference, at like a workshop, at whatever. And like you will be dragged along with us as we chat with other people. And like you will get to kind of like meet other people, but don't need to necessarily like insert yourself unless you want to. So we are definitely very helpful to help you network and honestly love to do it. So like utilize our superpower. But the other thing is there's certainly other ways to, grow your network. I highly recommend like Discord channels. I know lots of colleagues that have found jobs that way. Things like R Ladies, Pi Ladies. A lot of meetups have like Slack channels or discussion boards as well. So those can be ways where you don't necessarily have to be like super extroverted, but you can like chat with other people, see what's going on, kind of stay in touch. And I will say like the one power that introverts have that I struggle with is I'm really good at face-to-face. Like I will engage a ton. I will be very excited. But sometimes I forget to kind of follow up not in real life, like an email or a Slack ping or whatever. So sometimes it's harder for me to feed networks because my preference is like that in-face interaction, versus I think at least the feeding of networks might be a little easier if you're introverted, because you're like, well, I don't have to like go physically talk to somebody. I just shoot them an email with a cool article or whatever.
Yeah, give them a little pebble, a little introvert pebble. There you go.
Yes, some
And I
introvert
will,
pebbles.
I'll definitely +1 finding your local extrovert, which is not me. I'm highly introverted despite being here live with y'all a couple of times a week. At Posit Conf in 2023 when I attended, I lived in dread the entire time, but
Oh
Marlene was
no.
there. Mike K. Smith was there. Allissa was there. There were all of these people who were going to push me into doing things and be there with me. And it made it wonderful. Mike literally physically pushed me into taking pictures and doing other things I was terrified of doing. So yeah, highly recommend. Find your local neighborhood person who's more comfortable than you are.
Libby, did you see in the chat? I would love that if Posit had like a like, you know, extrovert willing to adopt introverts button. That's
Oh
so
my
cute.
gosh, that's a good idea. So if anybody doesn't know, if you've been to PositConf, there are almost always buttons that indicate your comfort level with other people, with like hugging or like I'm an elbows only person or like please don't take pictures of me, right? Maybe we could have a I'm an extrovert who's open to adopting you, come talk to me button. That would be amazing. Writing that down as as an idea. Okay, thank you, anonymous asker, for asking that question. I would love to head over to Mike K. Smith, who asked a question in the Slido. Mike, would you like to unmute and ask your question live?
Sure. And I just had, I want to counter what you've just said, Libby. I didn't intend to bully you or do anything like this. Hey, Allissa, the question is that when we're in organizations, when you talk about training, people immediately start thinking about instructor-led, classroom-based, all those kinds of things. And in your PositConf, you were talking about kind of more social learning, the pairwise or small groups of like-minded people. The social side seems to me to take, it seems to me like an awful lot to organize. In that you've got to find people who would match together. You've got to find little communities that would work together, like within organizations that may be tough. So can you give advice about how maybe you get the best of both worlds, or any tips on standing up those little kind of community-based groups within organizations rather than, because I think you were doing it with kind of bigger communities or outside of work organizations, right?
Yeah. So a couple things. Like first and foremost, like instructor-led training is great for like a good foundation, right? Like getting everybody kind of like that good solid foundation, kind of building those foundational skill sets. But it's actually a lot of work, right? Because it means like you as the instructor are building that entire bolus of content, and like you have to have the hands-on exercises and you're doing the live coding, and it's like a ton of time. Whereas like I would actually argue that some of these social ways of learning are actually less time on the individual. You can kind of think of it as like an unconference. I don't know if any of you all have ever like run a conference versus an unconference, but like running a conference is a ton of work, right? You have to formally set up like who's all going to speak and how do I pick who speaks and like structure the entire like, conference and like what's going to happen at what time. And unconference is like, we do it as a community. Like it's now not just up to me to plan everything. Like you all get to help me decide what we're learning it, how we're learning it, when we're learning it, right? And social learning can be a lot more like that. You can say, okay, guys, like, every week somebody else is going to pitch a different data set we play with, or, we're going to kind of come together and just like play with this new piece of software or whatever. And so it's it's a lot less structured and a lot less formal, which means like everybody can kind of play a role in it. And the nice thing about that too is like people can bring like the skills they have, right? Like I'm a biologist who like maybe doesn't quite know how to code in R very well. But I'm really excited to talk about like the biology of this data set versus like I'm a coder. I don't really know much about the biology, but like I'm going to be super stoked to like poke around in this data. And like together now, like we're going to learn from each other, right? And that's what's great about like peer-to-peer coding as well, is like now it's not up to me as the instructor to know like every little thing about every little thing, which obviously is impossible. Now like each person like is bringing their strengths to the table and they get to share them, you know, with the people that they're paired up with. This is also why I love hackathons. Hackathons are like a little more work than some of these other social kinds of learning, because it does require a little more structure. But at the end of the day, like, you know, building teams, you sort of like have some sort of form where people kind of like fill out like the things that they're interested in, they're good at, and that at least helps you kind of build teams that are going to be cohesive. And then, you know, again, for projects, like they kind of get to decide like what they're going to do with it, where they're going with it. So at least like that part of it is like less hands-on for you as the organizer. I will say the other really nice thing about things like hackathon and social learning is it's much more experiential learning, right? Like if you're thinking about kind of Bloom's taxonomy and like, you know, you learn, remember, learn, apply. Oftentimes in like very structured instructional workshops, like you get to that like maybe like remember and learn, but you don't get to apply. Even if they're doing a hands-on exercise, it's very canned, right? Like there is like a, you know, starting point, there is an end point, like it's very structured. It's got a lot of guardrails on it. For something like a hackathon or even like, you know, bring your own data or anything like that, it's open-ended, right? So now you actually take the skills you've learned and you're applying them to a completely different setting. So that's where you actually cement in learning. So in my opinion, you actually need a little bit of all of these things for like a full program and to really kind of hit all those points in how we learn. That was a really long answer. I'm so sorry.
No, it was great. I really, really love all the information. It's so good. And I love your hackathon brain. You have so much in there that I just want to like pull out. I'm going to reserve myself from the hackathon questions that I want to ask. And I'm going to head over to Slido to ask Arsenis to unmute and ask his question live. And Arsenis, I highlighted it and I'm going to stick it in the chat too.
Cool. Thank you, Libby. And thank you, Allissa, for sharing your experience with us today. Also, fellow former NIH person, I actually used to consult with Deloitte and NIH TB Depot. The TB Depot program was my primary client, so spent a lot of time there doing data science. My question to you was, what are some of the success stories that you've had with helping communities learn to code and kind of analyze their own data and kind of build stuff out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. One that I really like is a librarian program. So we were really interested in trying to get this particular NIH resource, you know, out there and getting people the skills to actually use it. And we ended up sort of, you know, it was kind of landed on that like librarians are like this hub of information, right? Like they are the touch point for a lot of universities, especially like medical librarians. So the idea of the program was to actually like upskill the medical librarians across these universities. And so that way, like, you know, not only would they like know of the resource, but they at least kind of had the, you know, like the foundations of like how to navigate it, what the tools were, where to get like more skills and things like that. And it was really cool because it was definitely not a group I'd necessarily worked with a ton before that. So like teaching medical librarians, like coding skills and things like that was really fun. Another one that we actually just wrapped up, which was really cool, was we got a small amount of money from Orca, which is about open science research. And so we built this whole program from the ground up to focus really on BIPOC students and getting them more open science, data science, and just like kind of around an authentic research kind of experience. And I feel like that not only did we get a ton of students really excited, but like a thing I think that is really a proud point for me is 70% of the people that participated were women. And a lot of what I do and a lot of the spaces I work in, it's definitely more male dominant, especially around hackathons. It's sits around like 20% of hackathon participants are women. So it was just really, really cool to have like that complete switch in balance, because we were really focused on like community driven projects when we did that program. And it was all very like a la carte, and they kind of got to build their own like learning journeys. So maybe that's kind of like what attracted students. But I felt really good about that, because that's something I've been working on for a long time, is trying to get, more gender parity in this space.
Always
and I definitely have to
my
give a
goal,
shout
too.
out, because that program would not be possible without my employee, Padma, who really did, she honestly built up quite a bit of that. I mostly supported and let her run with it.
Hooray, Padma. Okay, well, I have a follow-up to that directly. Let me head over to Slido because I absolutely know that I had one. This question was asked by please read for me. I think that's a sign they want me to read that for them. Okay. It says, every time I do the math, bringing on employees would add profit to my company, but the liability, benefits, and headaches, etc., don't seem to make sense. What conditions were met for you to feel comfortable bringing someone on? And yes, absolutely. It's a lot.
That is a
of
great
rigmarole.
question. It is. So here's the thing. Last year, I worked my butt off. I worked so hard to pull in the amount of clients, the amount of money, to feel confident in saying like I had enough to cover them. And first of all, it sucked. I worked way too much. I stressed myself out. It was not worth the amount of money I pulled in. But it did prove to me like, okay, like I can get this much work. I can support another person. So like from the financial standpoint, like last year was my practice year. It was like, can I pull in enough to actually like, pay for somebody else's salary, benefits, all that stuff. And so like, I felt, yes, check, I could do that. But the other thing was just, did I do all of that work completely on my own? No, I did pull in, I had a couple of people subcontract with me last year as well. Like that was my other test, was like, can I kind of like build a team of people? Can we work on a project together and finish it? How does that look like? So this last year was really a test of like a lot of those things, right? Like, can I pull in enough money, but can I also like manage some folks and do this work? I felt like that test went really successfully. But the other thing it really like hit home for me is, as I've said, I'm an extreme extrovert, but also as I've said, we work, or at least a lot of people, like human beings tend to be social animals. And it was so nice to build stuff with people again. Like the thing about consulting is oftentimes you kind of like, you're dropped into a situation, you're like, here's my 2 cents, fantastic. And then you're like, goodbye. So it was like really nice to be like, well, what do you think? And what should we do about this? And how could we go about doing this? And I like the amount of joy that brought me last year was worth so much compared to like the headaches of it. And yes, it is complicated. I don't know how many times I have been arguing with my accountant in the past 2 months. That has been absolute misery. I don't know how much back and forth I had to do to figure out health insurance in this lovely country. And what's really frustrating is like adding your first employee is actually harder than adding more, because a lot of like these benefits have like sort of a base flat fee, and then it's like $5 more per head. So like, yes, adding your first employee is in a lot of ways a lot more expensive than adding employee like 2, 3, 4. The other thing was, I hired a lawyer so I could like understand how to properly write like a employee handbook and an employee contract. So that way, to your point, like hopefully I, have covered all my bases and things are going to go well and everyone feels like they have a fair, arrangement and things like that. So there were definitely a lot of components that I spent time on in like the last 2 months of last year. And like I said, still kind of navigating some of that this year. But in my mind, very much worth it in terms of like happiness, in terms of now I don't have to work 80-hour weeks, but also in terms of like her and I have slightly different expertise. Like I'm definitely more bio, she's definitely more math. So it also means that we can pull in slightly different clients as well. So like really opens up our pool of projects we can take on.
I think that that's awesome. And that's one of the best things about working with other people in general is that you don't have to know every single thing.
Exactly.
You have somebody else's brain that you can meld with and like rely on their strengths. Like Rachel and I are very different and rely on each other's strengths, right? To like balance each other out. It works really, really well. If we were the exact same person, we wouldn't be as valuable. Okay. Fantastic question. Thank you for asking, anonymous asker, whoever you were. Good job. Adam, I saw that you had asked a question. Would you like to ask that live? Adam T, who I think is Adam Taggart.
Yeah. Hello.
There he is. Hey.
Hi. Hi, Allissa. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your experience with us today. And I do notice, and sorry, Libby, if this is not the way to do it, but I see a question immediately below mine, which kind of ties in. Basically,
Tie it in.
I'm curious how you go from having connections to clients without experiencing much friction, because certainly in the role I'm currently in, a lot of the people that ask for my expertise in handling data and sorting out programs for them, they kind of take for granted that, oh, they think it's just going to happen in 5 minutes, and they don't always know how long it's going to take. Sometimes they ask you something really easy. Sometimes they ask you something that will take months to build, and they just take for granted because they're not the ones footing the bill. And then as soon as you're a private contractor, I'm wondering, do they suddenly have to take note of that because you put them, you show them exactly how much it is that they're asking of you, and then they're like, oh, okay, I didn't think it was going to be that much. Have you experienced anything like that?
I have to say I've almost, but I've been kind of lucky because actually for the most part, my experience has been that, but with the positive. Like a lot of times they're like, oh, I don't think we realized how much you were doing while you were here.
We should have appreciated you more.
Or like, you really did a lot of those things, or you helped build a lot of those things, huh? I guess that that was really handy. There has been a few times here and there where it's like, psh, but like we could just get this postdoc to do this thing, you know, and not have to pay your fees, or we can, you know, get X, Y, or Z to do this thing. And I have typically argued that, like, for instance, when we got this NIH grant for the training center, you know, one of the questions was around like, well, you know, how are you going to deal with the fact that like you're, you know, kind of the new kid on the block when it comes to like this world of, you know, running a training center. And for me, I really push the point that like, if you know, if we are the grantees, like, our focus is training and engagement. Like the large majority of what we do is training engagement, not research, not other things, right? So like, because a lot of the times what happens with grants is they are given to universities who are typically doing research and then they do some training on the side, right? And so I sort of really push that like, this will be our focus. Like we will be incredibly focused on making sure this training is like, you know, or these trainings or this community engagement, whatever it is, like will be our main focus. And yes, we can pull in like, you know, how do we connect it to research? Like, and we work with tons of universities like to do that. So we don't necessarily need to be actively doing research ourselves to like know what makes a good research question in building a training or something like that. But like I said, I think I've been kind of a little bit fortunate in that a lot of the folks that I still work with at or interact with at NIH have been like very excited to work with me in this capacity. And have kind of come with a new appreciation of like how much work this space is. Because I will say, you know, research sort of gets all the glory and training is sort of like, we got to do some, but like whatever. And it's not really that hard, is it? Like a postdoc can just do it, or a grad student can just do it. It's not a big deal. And I think once they sort of see like there really is a difference between like, you know, when we are professionally building something, you know, and we have people who come in who are actually like, you know, developers and learning, and who have like whole PhDs on like how we learn and things like that. And we're working together to build something. Like it's a really professional, you know, learning experience, and programs that really, you know, take people through the entire journey. But that's the pitch I give them.
I think that's a great answer. And Adam, thank you so much for asking that fantastic question and for helping me follow on with that that second question, which I think is good, and I'm still going to ask it. But I do want to point out, Mike in the chat had said, like, my fears about being self-employed are like, oh, Mike will take on any old work, including cleaning up this work that other people left behind. I will say, as a freelancer, you get to choose what work you take. And I highly recommend that if you do want to freelance, that you are choosy. You say no to the wrong stuff so you can say yes to the right stuff. And you really have to just kind of believe that that right stuff is coming, and don't take the bad stuff out of desperation. It's not always bad. It just doesn't align with your goals, your skills, your comfort, whatever. And the next question is about this. So maybe you have more to add on to that. So the next question was like, what kind of clients do you have at the moment? Are they in academia, nonprofit? But the main question is the little last part that says, where do they come from? Because for Allissa and I think they both just come from people we know, our network. And that's the benefit of knowing a bunch of people, talking to a bunch of people. So I would love to morph this question a little bit, because you answered part of it already, and say, like, do you market yourself on purpose? Do you go advertise and be like, Biodata Sage commercial, here's what I do? Or are you able to get enough through word of mouth and stuff from your own network?
Yeah, so I definitely been putting a lot more effort into doing the whole marketing thing, posting more on LinkedIn, you know, going to conferences specifically like as Biodata Sage to be like, look at what we do, instead of like, you know, just going to support like client work. I will say that I've also found some clients on LinkedIn who have posted and been like, we really need somebody who does this for a short period of time. Or, you know, I've also found even on like Slack channels where they're like, we have part-time gig work on this data thing for a short period of time. So I've found some things here and there that way, and then they've built. But yes, this year I'm trying to be intentionally more like marketing. I have to say Padma has been great for that, because she'll be like, oh, you could do this. And then that's like, you know, really selling it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about the selling it part. Because I think at the end of the day, I approach a lot of this as a scientist. Like even when I do like training and things like that, I'm like very much like, this is cool because we'll learn this thing and we'll like, you know, iterate and stuff like that. And I don't always think about like the business side of things. And so she's been very good at like being like, wait, don't forget about this.
Don't forget to tell people what you do.
Yes, and doing things like this, right? Doing the going to Posit last year and really talking about like these are the kinds of things I do in my company, and hoping that like, you know, that will hopefully get more folks to kind of see what we do. But I have clients, academic clients. I have some nonprofit clients. I have a couple of industry clients. Also have a let's see. Yeah, I mean, kind of every sector, a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. I think that's good. Diversify.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will say, like, whenever I've hit like something I don't want to do, my tactic, which has really kind of only failed me once, is just ask for an exorbitant amount of money to do the thing I don't want to do. And typically they're like, we'll think about it. And then they don't come back. Although once or twice they've been like, cool, done. And I was like, oh no.
No, I have to take this. That's like when you ask somebody if they're willing to sell something and they give you a really high price. It's kind of like the I don't want to sell this price. Everything has a limit. Well, there's lots of agreement in the chat that selling yourself and your work is hard, even if you are not self-employed. It absolutely is. Even just remembering the cool stuff that I did, that I accomplished, making sure I write it down somewhere is so hard, almost impossible sometimes for me. Um, it's tough. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left somehow, and I would love to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions, see if we can answer them quickly. And then I would also like to ask you if you have a piece of career advice for us. So, rapid fire, have you used tidy models in your work? That's an anonymous one from Slido.
Not recently, not for a while.
All right. Answered. Was there a specific moment where you decided to turn your boss slash colleagues into your clients? Was there a specific moment where you were like, I'm going to do this?
No, that was kind of by accident, to be honest with you.
I love it. It's honest. You're just like, oops, this is happening.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
originally was like, there's no way, because like I didn't fit quite at NIH anymore, so like they probably don't want me here, so I'll go. And then they were like, come back.
So it is, yeah, it's just a very, very beautiful accident. Well, Hubert's question ties on to that. I'm going to paraphrase it by just saying, are there things you miss about the NIH?
I do. I mean, as an extrovert, I miss all the people, but also like the amazing thing about NIH is you can find anybody working on anything with any kind of technical expertise and any tool you could possibly think of. Like the resources there are so rich. It's amazing. And like if you are at NIH, by the way, please, like there are so many like interest groups and like cores and just amazing, amazing resources. Do not miss out on them.
Fantastic. All right, we're doing great with our rapid fire. Let's see. I wanted to shout this one out because Joe had put in the Slido, not exactly a question, but just a word of encouragement for budding entrepreneurs. Just giving a little like a hug to everybody. And someone followed on and said, like, try to find a mentor, someone's been there and done it who can help you along with your confidence. And Joe said he had to drop, but thanks, Joe, for the words of encouragement. Okay. Um, I will ask you one more rapid fire, and then I'm going to ask you a career advice question. So Neil had asked, I've heard of hackathons getting really competitive with people working long hours. When you organize hackathons, how do you ensure the well-being of participants and make it a fun experience? Great question.
Sure. That is a great question. So there are definitely times where we do like those all-nighter pizza fueled kind of hackathons where it's really focused on building a thing. But I have to say most of the time, the kinds of hackathons that I'm building are very much with the intent to learn and network in mind. So like we kind of treat them as like more of a learning experience, right? Like we come here, we have a bounded amount of time that we want to learn from each other. It helps that most of the hackathons I run are not competitive, like there's not an award associated. So they really are all there because they just are really excited to do something different and learn something new. But I sort of like very much set the stage as like, you know, we are here to learn something together. Like we're going to happen to build something together and that's great. But like our main focus here is like networking, learning, bringing different field expertise and just like exploring and seeing where that goes. The other thing is like, you know, we're here to like rapidly try stuff and a lot of stuff is not going to work. And that's kind of what we're expecting. Like if we knew it was going to work, like we just go do that thing and that would be our job.
Fantastic. Yeah, keep the learning and the meeting people the goal. That's a great takeaway. Because if you don't make it this like $1 million prize, then you will probably not have people staying up for 4 days to work on it. Okay, 1 minute left. Quick piece of career advice. Hot seat.
I think just keep trying new things. I think we often have this fear of like, but what if it doesn't work? What if it's a failure? Or what if I look stupid? Or, you know, and I think it's just try, like try the thing, try something new, pick something outside of your comfort zone. So much of my career path has been so far outside of my comfort zone. My PhD was in Karolinska Institute in Sweden. I didn't know anybody from Sweden. I had never been to Sweden. I decided that that would be something really different and very much outside my comfort zone. So that's where I picked to do my PhD. As I mentioned, when I started my company, I up and quit my job and was like, let's do this thing. Granted, like, it's not always going to work out, but as I told my 7-year-old, you cannot learn if you do not make mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. If you do something well and you do it all the time and there's never a problem, then you're also not learning and you're also not growing. And to me, I'm just like, I don't know, but this is clearly like a personality quirk, so maybe not great advice for everyone, but I just like, I have this need of like, if I'm sitting still, there's a problem. Physically, emotionally, mentally.
I'm sure that will resonate with people. Comfort zones are fantastic and they feel wonderful, but nothing grows exponentially inside of them. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for hanging out with us. This was so fun. Next week, we're joined by Alexander Schott, Senior Director at Sitel. Join us for that. Cannot wait to see you on the Discord. I just tagged Allissa in the Discord. So if you head to the Data Science Hangout channel, you will see Allissa there. You can tag her and thank her for this fantastic hangout. We love you so much. I'll see you on Tuesday at the Data Science Lab, pos.it/ds lab, if you would like to join me there. Mike has a puppy. Everybody say hi to Teddy. Hi, Teddy. Okay. We love Teddy. All right, everybody. Don't forget you can save the chat. 3 dots at the top of the chat if you would like to. And other than that, I will see you on Discord and see you Tuesday. Have a fantastic weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.